My name's Shane Mooney. I'm on the board of Student Affairs Ireland, and you're all very welcome to the first in our Spring Development Week, developing your practice. Um, as we look at ways to engage and interact with our students and staff, this would show how World Cafés can be a powerful tool to drive this engagement and conversation. A couple of housekeeping things. Can I ask you just to make sure that your microphones are off through this session, and we will have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll pick them up at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Margaret McLoone. Margaret, over to you.
Thanks very much, Shane, and thanks for having me today. I'm delighted to be able to just share, I suppose, some of my learnings around the World Café as a tool of engagement. So my name is Margaret McLoone, and I'm a lecturer in ATU Sligo, and I've been lecturing for 26 years in the area of health promotion. And I suppose my interest in World Cafés stems back a long period. I've used them for many years in practice. However, I only formally was trained last year as a globally accredited host. And I'll just talk to you a little bit about that in today's session. So I'm here today and I'm presenting on behalf of myself, and also in my spare time, I'm undertaking on a part-time basis a PhD study with Professor Colette Kelly and Professor Saoirse McGowan in the University of Galway. And this is one element of my research methodology, is using World Cafés. So I suppose just in terms of an interest in the area of World Cafés, I suppose I am a very visual learner. I like conversation and I like engaging with people. And over the years, I'm involved in a lot of work across the university with students, student health services, the age-friendly working group and mental health. And I found that we have a lot of conversations, but often we don't capture those conversations that can be very powerful when you get a group of people in a room together. So I suppose when I think about things that I enjoy in my own life, I suppose conversation is very central to a lot of my activities. So like holiday time, so that's my little Christmas plate that comes out every year, when we actually probably have a little bit more time to actually engage in conversation. And this in the middle is a place where I have some great chats with my family and friends. It's Nairn Beach in Donegal, which is quite close to me. And this is me having afternoon tea with my friends. So that was a 2.5 hour conversation. I also like walking and hiking. And what I actually probably enjoy more about that is the conversations that take place when you're out in beautiful places. And I also enjoy playing board games, which I think are great to turn off the telly. So we regularly in our neighborhood, I have a family that come over and we play board games as well. Highly recommend this board game if you're into conversation, called Balderdash. So I suppose from that, I kind of think that sometimes we don't take the time to engage in conversation properly, or are we taking part in conversations and not listening and recording those outputs? And I suppose giving people attention is becoming more and more difficult for us all. We're often, I suppose, pulled by this kind of concept of being in a rush. So I think a very powerful statement when you talk about World Cafés is that we need to listen to understand, not to reply. And it's something that I've been trying to do, is to actually listen to people, but don't be getting ready to reply immediately, to take on board what they're saying. And this is what happens really in a World Café, which I'm going to talk to you about. So it kind of emphasizes the importance of truly hearing and comprehending what another person's saying, and even better if we could use what they're saying and, I suppose, draw all that information together. So if I was to meet a group of students and they had concerns, or maybe they have a really important suggestions about how we run our health service on campus, how would we record, or how would we transfer all those conversations and make use of them? And I suppose with things like technoference and phobbing becoming really, really, I suppose, invasive in our health, but in society, I think that the art of conversation has to be highlighted, but it has to be taken seriously. And you don't have to look too far in the literature. We see so much literature out there about families, parents, I suppose, not making eye contact with their children. So we might be great at blaming them for their phones, but often I observe the parents are just as good on their phones when they're with their children. So thinking about that whole thing about technoference is where we kind of use technology, I suppose, and it actually impacts on our interpersonal exchanges with others around us. And it's something that actually kind of saddens me often when I go down maybe to the campus and I see on coffee breaks, probably 80% of people are on their phone um, instead of engaging in those simple conversations. So there's a lot of new literature, I suppose, out there around phubbing, which is where I actually snub somebody to be on the phone when I'm in their presence, probably organizing to meet my next friend at the same time. So this is what led me to this kind of idea that this is just such an important kind of tool to have, but also to use it in the correct manner. So, what if we decided that the conversation was how we're going to get things done, be that at a team meeting or be that as a part of research? And this is where the World Cafe, think, comes into its own, because if we have conversations that are structured in some format and engaging, but people are also feeling that their voice is being heard, I think it's really, really important. So I suppose for anyone who's interested in World Cafes, and I'm going to talk you through how to run a World Cafe, in 95 was the inception of the World Cafe, and this book would be the seminal kind of text, I suppose, on World Cafes. And it's called Shaping Our Futures Through Conversations That Matter. I've been very lucky that I've actually met with, as part of my training, Juanita Brown, who was one of the founders of this kind of methodology, I suppose. So what does it actually mean if I say I'm going to do a World Cafe? Well, there's some requirements, which again, I didn't realize till I undertook the formal training, that a World Cafe must have in order for you to be able to call it a World Cafe. But in essence, it's about having a conversational process, but it's based on collective intelligence at each table. And I suppose in terms of that, that it's about how we together come to the learning edge. So there's things that we'll all know at the table, but we'll also be learning from each other through these conversations. So the two kind of questions that we think about when we think about a World Cafe are, how can we enhance our capacity to talk and think more deeply together? So you have to have willing contributors in a World Cafe who want to be there and want to learn or want to contribute. And the other thing is that we, through mutual intelligence, will create paths forward or idea generation forward. So we can only be wise together. And what I really like about a World Cafe, because I'm conscious that many of you probably like myself work with a wide range of abilities, literacy levels, um, maybe neurodivergent students. And what I really like about the World Cafe is that everybody can take part in essence. And so I think it's a really nice, when we talk about UDL kind of principle, if I have people with lower literacy, for example, the onus isn't on them to sit there and write and fill in questionnaires. They can be part of a conversational process as well. So that's another kind of thing, I suppose, that the process works really for most people. Obviously, there will be some exceptions, but in general, I think it's quite a good UDL tool to use. And it kind of brings us back to Traxler's kind of thing that not everybody's going to learn different. So we need to be fair about how we get contributions, say, from our students or our staff or our peers at work. And in 76, when Traxler published this first about, not everybody's the same. So why will we put them in the one box for hearing their voice? And it wasn't until 2000, actually, when the New Zealand Herald republished that image in a slightly updated format, it gained a lot of traction. And I think it's a really powerful message for us all when we think about working with others in our organization, but also, when we're working with our students. And I see even with my staff, there's people who are so creative. There's people who are very good in terms of statistical work. There's people that are very good at public speaking. And I suppose it's that makes up a team and taking that into consideration. So when people ask first, what could you use it for? There's actually a multitude of uses that we could use a World Cafe for. We could use it as a team for planning. We could use it for team building. We could use it as a research methodology. I use it a lot actually as a teaching and learning mode with my students, because I find they really, really get a lot out of taking part in World Cafés. So ironically, I rarely use PowerPoint because I think the world is PowerPointed in terms of fatigue and watching slides. So generally my teaching and learning would take place around practical methodologies like a World Café for them to learn. And these are just some photos of them in class participating. Or we could also use it as a very powerful tool to engage the community. We can also use it for innovation, virtual collaboration. So you can hold World Cafés online. We can use it for conflict resolution. We could do a situational analysis to see where we're at in terms of maybe developing our services or engaging in terms of how we're going to move forward as a team. And then we could use it for more abstract and creative ideas and blue sky thinking as well. So what might a World Café look like? So this is a recent World Café that we ran as part of the Age Friendly University in ATU in Sligo College. So we recently gained, ATU gained the Age Friendly status. And I'm delighted that it was a really powerful tool because not only could the students engage with it, but we had I think around 50 something older adults who attended on the day. And it was a really, really wonderful event. I think Sinead might actually be here today. So Sinead's in the middle of the photo there, and she helped with the sessions that day in terms of their delivery. So we wanted to ask the older adults, how could we do more for them as a university in essence? And Sinead is doing this as part of her postgraduate research. So you'll just see kind of the setup. So um, which brings me on actually to a very interesting question Ronan had shared with me and Shane before the session started was what's the difference before I just go into running the World Café between a focus group and a World Café? And I suppose in many respects they couldn't be more different. So a focus group is facilitator led with very structured questions. In a World Café, you as peers are sitting together and talking with table round questions that have been provided. The output in a focus group would be we'd be using transcripts and recordings and qualitative driven kind of data, whereas in a World Café we don't record as a rule. Our harvest is what we produce in the session. It's usually, it can be visual, it can be text-based, we can write on tablecloths. The group size for a focus group is generally 8 to 12 in a formal manner. The World Café, you have to have a minimum of 12 to call it a World Café, but it has been used actually in groups of thousands to run World Café events. So it can be used at a much bigger scale. And it's about that kind of cafe ambience. The format is in a focus group, just I suppose we generally would have more questions in a focus group, somewhere in the region of 8 to 14. Whereas in a World Café, we have much smaller groups working at tables where we try and cross-pollinate ideas. And we generally would have 3 table rounds and an absolute max of 5. So it'd be a much smaller kind of number of kind of table round questions. In terms of then who's involved in a focus group, the facilitator runs the entire thing. I suppose, in essence, and their role is central. Whereas in a World Café, the host actually is just there to make sure the event flows, and they're very much in the background. And we have contributors taking part as opposed to participants. The other thing is, I suppose, the participants in a focus group provide feedback really to us, maybe on a range of questions that we predetermined, whereas we often in a World Café are trying to come up with new ideas. So how do you feel we could do more for you as students in terms of the waiting time of health services? And we're going to co-create those ideas. A focus group generally would be in the region of 30 to 45 minutes. A World Café would probably be a little bit longer, in the region of 90 to, sorry, that should be 120 minutes there. Because I just added this slide in, sorry, this morning. So it'd be generally a longer, more kind of relaxed, sociable affair, I suppose I would call it. So I suppose when we come back then to how could we, use this in the third level sector, what's really important for us in terms of running World Cafés is creating conversations that matter and that we reach a stage of getting to that magic in the middle. So we often have a lot of unanticipated outcomes when we run a World Café for various reasons. So just for people who would like to run World Cafés, what I learned actually recently is there's a whole lingo, I suppose, around them that would be different to other research areas that I've worked in. So generally speaking, we'd have a check-in, we call it, at a World Café, where they'd get a good cup of coffee, they'd mingle, they'd chat. It's not kind of a rush thing where we rush into the room, sit down and start asking questions. You have to kind of let people be at ease, I suppose, before you start. People taking part in the World Cafe are what we call contributors. So I know we use participants in most research methodologies. We don't have questions as such. They're called table rounds. So a table round would generally last about 20 minutes for a table round. So we'd have a question. I use question bubble on every table. And I use different ways of kind of just because they're going to be talking about this issue for maybe 20 minutes as well. The other kind of thing is that the person who's kind of leading out at the top of the room, but in the background at the same time, is called the host. So their role would mainly be to clarify why you're here, to set up the space in advance. So I find it actually takes a fair little while to set up the space. So this will be a space I've set up with round tables, maybe flip charts. I'd have the questions on flip charts with some graphics. I'd explain what we're going to do for the next 90 minutes. I'd ensure the session flows, circulating around the tables, and then I would help with the harvesting stage. So this is when we get the materials of conversation off each table, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how you do that. But I suppose the difference with the World Cafe is I'm actually in the background, really. I'm just there as a kind of someone making sure the process runs smoothly. And I suppose I'm not going to get into this, but as a host, there's a whole range of literature out there around. You need to engage in what we call the fourfold practice. So you have to be able to host yourself. You have to be able to host others. You have to let the people in the group be able to host you. And then I'm also part of a larger hosting community. So globally, we run events every 6 weeks to have conversations about things and be part of that community as well. So the table host is the person who maintains the continuity at the table. Generally speaking, it'll just be a contributor who's turned up to the session and they will nominate themselves that they'd like to be the table host. Sometimes you'll see it written as a table steward or facilitator. And their role really is that they welcome people to the table. They keep the conversation flowing. They try and include everyone. They try and capture ideas that are happening at the table. And then they also, a very important thing is that they stay at that one little small table for the entire session, whereas everybody else moves around to cross-pollinate the ideas. So in this instance here, these two girls were the hosts. They nominated themselves at the start, so they remain there, whereas the 7 or 8 other tables, the people were moving around at the end of each question. So when I talk about a mini harvest, what might that look like? So I just tried to make this visual really so that to let you understand. So this was a mini harvest from, I'm doing research in the area of breastfeeding. So what a mini harvest means is that they were asked 5 questions in this table round of World Cafés, and the little hexagonal post-its were each of the questions they were asked. And as a group, at the end of each question, I asked them to give the 3 kind of key things that came up in their conversations. And then the table host recorded those and then we put them up and discussed them. So that's what a mini harvest, I suppose, essentially means. A master harvest then is at the end of all of the table rounds. We have an overarching feeling from each group of the things that came up in the entire session. So what might that look like? It'll be something maybe like this, where they come up with 3 main things, or 4, or it might be 1. I generally prescribe that I'd like to see 3, because otherwise you might end up with only 1 thing that's very small. But generally after an hour and a half conversation, they'll be able to come up with what's stuck in their mind or what came out of the session for them. So the other thing is just to be aware that when we're running a World Cafe, we're essentially running a conversational greenhouse. We're trying to get the right environment to get people talking. And in order to call your work a World Café, it must adhere to these principles from the World Café Foundation. These are the 7 principles. And I'm just going to very briefly just explain them to you. Each of these, actually, we would have spent a full week on each principle. So the first thing is that people need to come along and they need to know, and we're kind of used to doing this in our work roles. We would have the context of the session, the participants, why are you here and what's the purpose? If you're doing it for research, you probably will have a participant information leaflet and consent form, which will make this relatively easy. But I suppose it's just to give us a context of what are we here to talk about today, to keep some parameters on the conversation. The second thing then is we need to create what we call a hospitable space. And I remember when I started in 2000 in ATU in Sligo 99, the first thing I remember coming in and seeing theatres. And I remember going in and asking my boss, was there any chance we could have some round tables in a classroom and some flip charts? Um, because learning can't take place in conversations in rows. So this is kind of what I would often use is I would maybe do up some posters. So this is for a module review at the end of the semester. I would maybe, if it's research, I might have some consent form stuff up on the board. But most importantly, the room has to have round tables or similar. So this was the World Café event with Sinead. So I robbed all my tablecloths from home and little plants on the tables and kind of make it look kind of hospitable, I suppose, and welcoming in a classroom setting. Um, Now, I know the World Café Foundation talk a lot about paper tablecloths. I found that paper tablecloths are great, but students or participants in this type of work often write if you give them a little post-it more than they would on the tablecloth, and it's easier to manage it afterwards. So that's what we mean by open space. We can also do a World Café digitally. You can have a live Word document when they break out into their rooms. Um, you can use different apps called Padlet or Miro to get that feedback as well. So digital kind of conversations that matter. And if anyone's interested in the digital, I just saw this paper actually this morning, and I was just taking a quick look through it. It's around using World Cafés online. And this is what a World Café harvest would look like potentially. So we would have graphically facilitated work. And I've done the graphic facilitation course actually with Tamsin Cavallero in ATU Sligo, and it's an absolutely wonderful tool to. So the first night we go along, and Tamsin is very true. I didn't believe her, but everybody can draw. Because with icons, everybody can draw, and there's so much prompts and tools out there. The third principle then is obviously that we think about our questions and just putting up a couple of like kind of quite good texts in this area. I know some of them are quite old, but they're still very, very meaningful. So you have to ask the right questions, obviously. A good question, I suppose, is provocative and lingers in your mind. And it can take a good while to come up with the questions, even though you might only have 3 questions. You need to word and phrase them very carefully. And we want people to speak with intention, but listen with attention during those World Cafés sessions. So the fourth one then is obviously I really like because we really try and encourage everybody's contribution and we're contributors to this process. We're not just there to participate, we're actively contributing. And probably the most important thing that makes a World Café really nice, and when you get to this stage, and not every World Café you get to it, is that people move between the tables. So everybody's doing the same question at the same time. But then the next question, we move tables and you get a new group of conversation. And we call, when we feel that there's ideas transferring across the groups, we call it the magic in the middle or cross-pollination of conversation. And that's a really, really important kind of thing to consider in a World Cafe. The other thing is then we're going to listen for insights together. We're probably going to listen to them, I suppose, about what's been said, but also about what's not being said. So generally, our host might record their observations, and we would listen and summarize what we have talked about before we go into the final session. So here, this is how I would set up a World Cafe. I'd have my table questions. I'd have my little colored post-its, which might seem simple, but I make the participants or the contributors use a different color post-it when they're talking about each question, because at the end I can then identify all of the orange ones were question 1 comments, all of the green ones were question 2, and so on. And I found out of practice that made my life a lot easier at the end when you're trying to look back and take information from the World Café. So the other thing I encourage people to do is when they go to the table, first I ask them to write down on their post-it their own first thought about the question before they even start the conversation, because it gives you a starting point, but it also gives you material at the end as to what they talked about as well. Because I have got very nervous at sessions where there's an awful lot of conversation, but I'm not really getting much harvesting coming back. So that means that we move into this idea then at the end. The final principle is we share what we've learned together, so that we're back to this kind of putting everything together, making it visual to the audience, and then we have our master harvest. So what's another actually just thing I just wanted to mention is that World Cafés can take place across campuses, across country boundaries. So we can build on World Cafés, we can scale it up very easily, particularly in the online form, from what happens to be a conversation that started in ATU in Sligo can suddenly become something that might become more global as those conversations evolve. So just a couple of tips myself, just from running World Cafés. I think the ambience is really important. I think it's worth spending the time getting the room set up nicely. I think the time, I suppose it's in an ideal world, you don't want really people to feel rushed. So they should be arriving there not in a rush. Okay. So probably at 3 o'clock on a Friday evening isn't the best time to host a World Café. You should only really have 4 contributors at every table. Maybe 5 at the most for under the World Café kind of guidelines. Everybody's answering the same question at the same time. So for years, I used to think that everybody at the different tables was answering a different question. But no, it's actually everybody works on the same question at the same time. And then when we move to the next table round, people move around and we all work on the same question again. And the table host remains at the same table for the entire session, which I've mentioned already. Everybody else moves around though to new tables. You have to have 12 participants to officially be able to call it a World Café. If you don't have 12 participants, I do still proceed with the World Café, but you have to then state that it's based on the principles of the World Café methodology, just to be technically correct. I find around 20 minutes you need for each table round, and maybe after about 15 minutes, I'd encourage them to kind of come up with their summaries. And there needs to be a minimum of 3 questions for you to be able to call it a World Café. And like I mentioned, I find the different color post-its works really well for a World Café. So if you look here in this picture here, I have the questions on the flip chart. So question 1, they're going to put it on an orange post-it. Question 2, and again, it might sound very simple, but it does make your life a lot easier. I'd have then the questions on the table in the bubbles, but I'd also have maybe the flip charts around the room with the questions. And then I have the results visual where they go up and put up the results and we talk about them. So this is just some examples of different World Cafés that we've hosted. This is like sorry, I mentioned this a little bit earlier on about the age friendly. Found it really good for older adults because they really, really were interested and engaged. And in fact, we probably had the opposite problem, was trying to bring the conversations to a close in relation to that. And just for anyone who's interested, I'd highly recommend that you take a look at the worldcafe.com website. I was very lucky to be funded through our Centre for Teaching and Learning to undertake this course last year. It's probably one of, well, I actually don't think it is one of, it is the best course that I have done in CPD in all my career. It was the most wonderful experience meeting people from student affairs kind of areas all over the world, management in universities, people working with in terms of reducing inequalities in our education system. And it was an online course over 8 weeks. And if you're interested, Amy can be contacted at this email address, and we'll have the slides afterwards for you anyway, so you can follow up on any of this. So it's the only recognized World Café learning program by the World Café Foundation form. It's over 8 weeks, and I was really lucky to have two amazing hosts. Amy was from America and Maria was from Greece. And each week, the time and their delivery was just almost emotionally uplifting, because they really care and they really walk the walk in terms of engaging with people, listening, understanding, etc. So I suppose just to finish as well, I want just to say thank you to I'm very fortunate that we have an amazing teaching and learning team in A2U. So Neve and Patricia and Louise and Jamie assisted me with the training through funding. And also my colleague in A2U who's taught me graphic facilitation. So I do it both manually and then now I'm trying to learn how to digitally. So all the little images you see on these, I've actually drawn them all myself. So they just do make a difference, I think, when we move away from text. So I want just to thank Tamsin, and obviously in true Tamsin style, she has a graphically facilitated picture of herself. Um, and also just in terms of my hosts who really help me understand conversations that really matter and how to get to the end of them. And also as part of my research, because I'm great at coming up with ideas. So when I went marching to tell my supervisors that I wanted to include another phase in my research with the World Cafés, they were really supportive of that. So Professor Colette Kelly and Professor Saoirse McGowan, I wanted to also thank them. Just incidentally, just one other thing was for the World Café course, if anyone's interested in it, it's about $800, but there is a significant early fee reduction of about $200, I think, if you sign up. I can't remember, maybe before August, and it only runs in September and October once a year. So it's kind of, it's maybe around, I can't remember when I did it, I think it was September, October, November time. And the disadvantage now, which did put me off, but I got the money, so I had to go ahead with it, was it was held on a Sunday evening. So that really fried my brain for a while working on a Sunday evening. It felt a little bit weird. But anyway, just so people are aware. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And I know that's a very kind of rushed whistle stop tour, but I just if anyone wants any more information or advice, or if anyone's thinking of using it in their research or would like help hosting, I'd be delighted to help you in any way I could. Not that I'm any expert at all, but I do have a little bit of experience of running them and things I've learned as well. So I'll just hand you back to Shane because I haven't seen what's going on for the last 30 minutes or so. So thank you very much.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Margaret. When I saw your 52 slides, I was going, geez, we'll be here all afternoon, but you flew through them and absolutely brilliant. You covered a huge amount in a lovely way. So thank you. There's a couple of things that I took, and I might just kick off with a couple of bits. I'd never heard, Margaret, of that word fubbing before. And when I saw it on the slide, immediately moved my
Uh,
phone away and put them at the side of the desk. So I think that's a message for us all. Put the phones away and listen to the conversation. Another thing that comes through is listening to understand and not to reply. Do you just want to expand on that a little bit as what how the World Cafe facilitates that listening to understand?
yeah, I suppose what they taught me in the training was this kind of concept that I probably and many people when we sit down to have a conversation with someone, I'm often getting ready with my answer because I have to get back in with my answer. But am I actually listening to the person who's talking opposite me and taking on board what they say and taking that pause to take it on board and to listen, not to reply, but to actually listen to genuinely what they're saying. And I think it's actually a very, very hard thing to do. You think to actually listen and not be trying to answer someone back. We're trained to answer back straight away. So yeah, that Covey book actually I can't remember the seven principles of an engaged thinker, is it, or something? That's actually a very good book that talks about the listen to understand and not reply. Not that I'm saying that I'm any expert thinker now, but I found it was really a really good read, like just around that. So yeah, so when you're trying to butt in, at meetings, I do kind of try now and behave myself, sit back, listen until they're finished, and then we'll reply. So I think it's a good principle just for life in general.
Brilliant. Thanks, Margaret. You covered the comments are fantastic coming in here, Margaret. Visuals are brilliant, fantastic presentation, very clearly laid out. So brilliant. There's one question that's here, Margaret, which is quite an interesting question. And
Yeah.
just to cover off on this, I'm thinking of using a World Cafe format to provide a pre-entry orientation session for here students. Do you think this would work for this cohort of
Yeah.
students?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think, in fact, they'll probably get so much more out of it because they feel they're being listened to and their voice is being heard. It also suits people of different intellectual abilities and different literacy levels. So yeah, I definitely and if whoever would who's thinking of doing that, I've no problem if they want to chat to me about how I would recommend you might go about that. I'm not sure what a pre-entry orientation means, but I presume it's before they start the course
Mhm.
in the college, I presume. But yeah, of course, yeah, I think it'd be brilliant because that's what I like about it. It's not an academic based kind of thing. It's not around writing and typing. Like in theory, I could be at the World Cafe and just talk and not write down at all, or my host might write for me. So yeah, I think it's really, in fact, I think it's probably an ideal tool for here students, to be honest with you. And that's what I was thinking about. Because I know that one of my colleagues, Ailish, is here actually today, and she had asked about the neurodivergent student, and I think it would be a wonderful tool to use with them, as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And actually, you mentioned Sinead a couple of times. Sinead, when Sinead has finished her PG research, we'll have her back here to present on the next stage of the World Cafe. That'll be fantastic. Another
Oh yeah.
question. Just landed you in it there, Sinead. Another question that's just come in, Margaret. Considering the inclusive and conversational nature of the World Cafe methodology, do you think it could be effectively applied to workplace settings to support employee well-being, particularly as an alternative to online training formats where engagement is often low until the Q&A session?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's I'm just thinking about in terms of a lot of employee wellness, because I'm involved kind of in this area myself, is that often prescribed by the manager decides that we need a walking group or we need um, a mental health stress reduction workshop because there's might be a corporate requirement. But I think if we actually use the World Cafe at the very initial stages to see what people were interested in as elements of their workplace wellness, but also, yeah, to create conversations around health and well-being in the workplace, I think it'd be brilliant. But I think it would be more important to be used to inform what the content of those workplace wellness sessions are, that they're not prescribed by someone in one individual. So it's like if I go into a school, I tell the kids that we're going to do GAA, but maybe those kids aren't interested in GAA, they want a dance class. So I think I would use it in advance to plan out my workplace wellness sessions, but then you could also use it as a tool for delivery um, around issues. It could be bullying in the workplace, it could be addressing dignity at work or whatever. So yeah, Sinead, and you've got a job next year with Shane presenting all that
That's
age-friendly data.
that's fantastic,
So
Margaret.
I'm supervising Sinead just for her PhD, and she's using the World Cafe actually for the age-friendly kind of analysis of our university, and I think it's going to be brilliant to see what comes
Wow.
out of it.
That's fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and I can see just the powerful ownership if in a staff setting where if the master harvest is coming from the staff in that way itself, it just there'll be a lot more ownership and a lot more buy-in. That's fantastic. Um, we'll let you in on a little secret, everyone. Margaret, we did have some questions beforehand, so Margaret has covered off on those
Okay,
in the Q&A. So some of the questions were covered in Margaret's presentation. So thanks for that, Margaret. And that's why I think that one slide where you mentioned the 120, that's because you were doing that on the back of the questions that we'd already got.
good, good.
Okay, if there's no more questions, guys,
Yeah, but I thought it was actually Shane.
yeah, go on, yeah.
I found, Shane, it was very useful to have the question just for, again, I thought that was really good to see the questions people had, because for me, I found that was useful just when you see what other people are thinking before they came along. So that was really, and I wanted to thank you guys for all your technical support.
That's
'Cause I'm not a great Zoom user. So yeah, thank you so much.
That's nothing to do with me, Margaret. It's all Ronan's work. Okay, well, listen, guys, if there's no more questions, thanks a million for joining today.